Hello and welcome to today's panel. I'm Elle Osili Wood. I'll be your host this evening. And this is a BAFTA Games panel called We're Not Just Playing, the Politics of Games. So this panel today is in collaboration with the Orwell Foundation, which is something I'm really excited about. They're an incredible foundation that celebrate and support political and social writing. And they've chosen to join forces with BAFTA and celebrate political writing in games. So it's a thorny topic, and I'm pretty excited that that's what we're kind of kicking off the year with. So we've got some fantastic panelists coming up for you. Now, as I said, we've got some fantastic panelists. So what I'm going to get them to do is introduce themselves and also the game that's kind of brought them here today, because each of them have a really interesting title that they've worked on that fits the theme of the panel this evening. So Imre, I'll start off with you.
Hello, hi, I'm Imre Jele, and I've been working with the team to create a faithful adaptation of Orwell's Animal Farm, which we released late last year.
It's absolutely fantastic, I have to say. Really loved it. So we also have Florent. Did I say your name right? Was that even close?
Yeah, not bad at all. Yeah, so my name is Florent Maurin, and I'm the head of the Pixel Hunt, a small French studio based in Paris, and we made a game called Bury Me, My Love, about the journey of a Syrian migrant from Syria to hopefully Europe.
Oh, another wonderful title. Thank you so much for joining us. We also have Navid with us this evening. Navid, tell us everything we need to know.
Hello. Hi, my name is Navid Khonsari. I have a studio with a whole bunch of my friends and partners called Ink Stories in New York, and we put out a game called 1979 Revolution Black Friday, a verite game, as we call it, based on the experiences of Iranians during the 1979 revolution, and it was in collaboration with Iranian artists, Iranian actors, and so it was really like a community-born kind of project. And we've been gone on to do some other projects in virtual reality that deals with the situations in Syria and so forth. So we're very much kind of in this verite game kind of world.
Really excited to dive into your stuff. And finally, Ellen, please tell us everything we need to know about you.
Hello. Hi, nice to be here. My name is Elin Festoy. I'm a producer based in Norway. I created the game called My Child Lebensborn together with the Sarepta Studio in Norway, which tells the story of the treatment that the children born of German soldiers and Norwegian women experienced in Norway in the 50s. So we work with these children who are now in their mid-70s. And I'm currently also doing a PhD in artistic research at the Norwegian Film School, looking at emotionally charged interactions in nonfiction, just how we can explore this emotional connection to true stories.
Well, I mean, as I said, what an incredible lineup. We have got 4 incredible titles, 4 incredible panelists to dive into this evening. So I'm going to get things started. Ellen, I'm going to start with you. Do you think that games have a responsibility to kind of either interrogate political and social issues, or even to just represent them, you know, in the games that we create, in the work that we build as part of this industry?
I don't think I'd use the word responsibility, because I think just pure joy is a wonderful thing, and that games should deliver pure joy as well. But it is a fact that it is a very strong medium where interactivity can touch you in a totally different way than other less rich medias. So it's a super interesting medium, and it's really something that we should be explored in order to tell the important stories, because we have such media-rich lives. And I think that the important stories can drown in all the volume and content that's around us. So the important stories also need to be on the game platforms.
Navid, for you, as you said, you kind of started off with this incredibly powerful work that I think, you know, anybody who's played it stays with you for a really long time. And that's kind of a vein that you've stayed in, that you've continued to kind of work within. So do you personally feel a responsibility? Do you think it's something that, you know, should be more widely felt across the industry, or is it kind of down to the individual who's making the title?
I don't think it's something that should be thrusted onto the industry, quite honestly. I feel that whether you want to talk about politics, you want to talk about world history, these are elements that we see being, you know, spoken in films and documentaries, certainly through the news and through other forms of literature. And I feel that we need to kind of, there's two things that we need to take a look at. We need to really take a look at the industry that we're in and recognize that while it touts the profits that it kind of has and the footprint that it's leaving economically, that it's still very much in its infancy in many other areas. And I think that we have an executive class within this industry that looks towards profit and looks towards what Hollywood has done and says, let's kind of emulate that. So which is to no fault, because it is a profit-driven industry. You know, in the end, you want to be able to tell as many stories as you can, and that means you want to have as many people be able to interact with it and play it. But I think we keep on looking in this direction and trying to emulate these big kind of blockbuster Hollywood stories or scary stories. And meanwhile, we've got all these real human stories, which we've seen through these exact same mediums of film and television and documentaries, to be just as enriching and just as much of provide us with that connective tissue. But what we do have in games, unlike all the other mediums, in line with what Ellen was saying, was that the interactivity of this is of the nature of what we're creating is so immersive that it allows us to put another in the shoes of that person who we're kind of portraying the stories about. And I think that we're doing a discredit to the medium if we're about to say, well, this is all about entertainment, and that we should throw the protocols of what needs to get done for the betterment of the industry on a certain kind of group or executives that say like this is what's needed. It has to come from the individuals that you're seeing on this panel, because we're kind of the pioneers. But to dismiss it as some habits that games should be strictly kind of entertainment is being really kind of short-sighted and actually being disrespectful to the medium that we all kind of work in. I hope that answers roughly what you were asking.
No, I mean, it definitely does. Imre, what's your take on this? Because, you know, this is something that comes up a lot in discussions, that, you know, when we do just strive for pure entertainment and pure joy, as wonderful as that can be, we are kind of wasting the potential that the unique immersion of games offers.
The fact is that for decades, we were angry at society for not taking us seriously. And I think we have to act serious if we want to be taken seriously. You know, it mentioned before, I don't want to repeat the same points, but film goes from from light-hearted comedy to very serious art, and from action blockbuster summer films to, you know what I mean? So it's good to have that variety. And I don't think it's down to the individuals responsible that every time you have to tell a serious story about a serious subject, but for us as a form of art collectively, I think it is a responsibility that we find a way. And I'm just going to finish with a thought, which is not mine. The line which I really like, and I'm really hoping I'm quoting him correctly. The line is that in our age, there is no such thing as keeping out of politics. And that's a line Orwell wrote in the early 1940s. In an essay titled "All Art is Propaganda," and I do believe that all art is propaganda. So it's like we have to be that not making a statement is making a statement. So I guess if we want to be taken seriously as a form of art, we have to act like it.
I mean, you came prepared. What a great quotation. That's, you know, kind of exactly the thrust of this question. Florent, for you, you know, how do you feel about it? Is all art propaganda? You know, can we no longer remain apolitical?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would even argue that it's maybe even more true for games than it is for any other art form. Because as you know, making a game as a game designer, we all the time we decide what is right and what is wrong. What players are supposed to be doing in the game to win the game. Even though I'm being a little bit like cliche here, because some of the games we make don't have any specific victory conditions. But we as game designer are puppet masters. We decide what should be done in the game to achieve certain results, and what is punished. And this is definitely completely political. Like saying that a game is not political is inept because of that. You can always argue that, yeah, but is Tetris really political? All you want. The fact is, the relationship we game designers have with our audience is one of kind of manipulation and trying to bring them to some conclusion. Some of those conclusions are only oriented around fun and entertainment, but most of the time, we try to evoke feelings and make them react. And this is, for me, deeply political. So I don't really care about being taken seriously, but I just want to pay attention to what I'm doing. So that's enough for me in that respect.
Florent, I'll come straight back to you, because that kind of leads perfectly into my next question, which is that people often can, when they hear, oh, it's a game with political issues in it, or it's a game with social issues in it, they think, I don't want that. I'm here for escapism. I'm here to relax or unwind. They think of it as something that is completely separate. The two can't be combined. And what you were just saying is that that's not the case, that it doesn't have to mean that you can't use that as escapism just because you're confronting issues. Do you think that's true?
Well, I definitely understand the point that some people, after a long day's work, trouble at home or anything, they don't want to come to video games and be annoyed by stories that would be heart-wrenching, for instance. I can understand that. But the thing is, some of the biggest brain killers, some of the games that you would play typically to like wash any trouble away, are designed so that you keep playing them again and again and again. Candy Crush, most of the mobile phone games, they are designed like in their rules, in their mechanics, in the way that they hijack your brain. They are designed to keep you playing. And this is not fun. This is manipulation. And so that's interesting, that even if you argue that I just want to have fun, I just want to relax, people who make games are competing for your attention and to have you in their grasp. So in a way, you can't, I'm sorry for the people who really want to relax, but you can't leave your critical thinking aside, even when you play games. And once you started thinking critically, then you can never really stop, sadly.
Imre, do you think that, you can have a game that both fits that requirement that some people have to feel as though they're escaping and getting away from everyday life, but also something that does, positively use that immersive nature of games to kind of have them reflect on societal issues?
I understand what Florent's saying, but like, not every day I want to watch BoJack Horseman, right? So there are some days I just want to watch a rerun of Friends. So it's okay to, I think it's okay for the players to choose their level of engagement, and sometimes we want to play a game which is just I just go around and jump from platform to platform because that's what I want to do. But I think everyone have their own taste. But I think that someone saying that this form of entertainment shouldn't exist because I don't like it, that's just extremely foolish. And I've seen this online, is that people confuse that. People say, oh, I do not like that genre of gameplay or that theme, therefore that shouldn't exist. That's just extremely silly. And similarly, there's also this question is poisoned by the fact that often people confuse things that for example, representation is not political. Representation is just representation. I look around my group of friends and it's a varied group. So if I make a game, I want to represent that. So this is not coming from a political point of view. And oftentimes what happens that that certain extreme political views come into the gaming culture, and they pick on that because they feel like, well, you know, it's an agenda. It's not an agenda, it's just representation. So I think this question can become really complicated because of that it's already sometimes hard to tell, because some games are in between, and it's rightfully pointed out that I don't like, you can play Call of Duty just as a shooter, but really you have to realize that what it's really about, intentionally or not, by the developers. And then on top of that comes the layer of people confuse real political games and accuse games of being political just because they do reflect modern society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Definitely one that we'll come back to later, you know, exploring the idea of what is a political game, and when are you actively exploring politics and when are you just representing people. I think that's, you know, definitely something we'll touch on again. Navid, you are now looking at games in VR. That's kind of where you're working, which I think, you know, a lot of people think of as the ultimate escapism. It's, you know, as close as games can get to quite literally taking you somewhere else. So how have you balanced, you know, the way people want to feel when they're whisked away in VR with, you know, the challenging topics that you're exploring?
Well, most of the projects that we have participated in virtual reality, where we've looked at conflict in Syria or race in America, the objective has been to, quite honestly, utilize the hardware to isolate, and in line with what Florent was saying, was to manipulate, to get people to forget everything that's kind of around them and for them to be able to go to that place. I think that that's kind of one of the powers of virtual reality. Obviously, the challenge is that, you know, the number of headsets and who gets to do it. So most of our work has actually been going towards kind of art installation and exhibits. So we did a project called Hero, which put you on the streets of Syria, where we built out a 20 by 30 foot exhibit and allowed people to smell, listen to open audio. All the actors that we did for motion capture were Syrian refugees. Everyone that was scanned was a Syrian refugee that was in the tri-state area. So we really try to bring that authenticity in the process of designing and creating into virtual reality, but recognize that it's also just a different tool that allows us to kind of get this messaging across and design and work kind of towards that. I just wanted to say something about the question that was asked previously, and I think it's important to point out that the panel that you have here, the interest that you have from people that have jumped onto this conversation that we're having today, this is a culmination of political games that date back to the 90s. And quite honestly, most of them failed because they were being driven by nonprofit or a particular agendas, recognizing games as being a powerful tool. Now what you actually have is designers who are actually interested in putting these stories as the forefront and not saying, well, it's a great way of like getting into the hands of teens and teaching them about democracy. It's more of like, this is a really interesting story. And it might have been told as a film, it might have been told as a documentary, but the impact that I can have as a video game is there. But I think that there's been a disservice that's led to people being skeptical about politics and games kind of coming together. And we're just seeing that needle kind of shift over with the fact that you've got designers that are skilled enough that also understand what are the commercial checks boxes that you need to hit that have, you know, like my work at Rockstar for 6 years was absolutely instrumental to making 1979 the way that it was. I took those pillars of like production. So I think we're at the point now where we realize what that particular group has done to gain audiences. And now we're like, we think this subject matter is unbelievably interesting. Let's take those lessons from there. Let's mash it up with our storylines and bring it in and then expose audiences to it. And I think that that in itself is where we're at right now. And I have a huge amount of respect for everybody on this panel that's been pushing it, because we're kind of been in the trenches, but we're now on the surge of like, I'm getting interest from young game designers, people who are graduating who are like, I want to do this kind of material, but this conversation wasn't happening 5 years ago.
And do you agree with that? Do you think that, you know, we are at a point now, because, you know, as with all the titles, say if I talk about yours, My Child Lebensborn, that absolutely feels like a game. And for me, it was a game that did have, you know, light and shade to it. It's a topic that you might look at and think, well, this will be heavy, this won't be escapism. But for me, it was about redefining what escapism is. You know, as has been brought up earlier, you don't always watch a film to be, you know, smiling and having the best time of your life all the way through. It's about exploring things, visiting other perspectives. So, you know, for you, did you feel that you needed to lean more on how you built it as a game to deliver that message rather than, you know, kind of the message itself?
Absolutely. I think it's at the core of the whole project, because as for us, the motivation was in the story, but it is an interactive experience. It is a game, and I often think that I think of myself as trying to be a host for someone coming into my universe and having a good experience. And I think especially when you're dealing with ethically challenging topics, you need to respect the player so that they have the space to think about the issues they're presented with and make up their own minds. And if you come to this thinking that you want to push a story, then you don't create that room for the player. And then it doesn't really work, because you can't, if you push up the story onto someone, then it is propaganda. Then it is an uncomfortable feeling. And also when we marketed the game, we were very, very specific in calling it an interesting game experience. Not saying that it was documentary, not talking about the true story, just mentioning it, because we knew that if people actually played it and had a good experience, they would get the point that this actually happened. So I think I see the others nodding, which is good. I think that sort of respecting the player is at the core of telling difficult stories.
This makes me want to dive into each of your games. So let's do that. Florent, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about Bury Me, My Love. Tell me a little bit about, you know, what the central theme of that was, why you decided to tell that story, and, you know, kind of, obviously we haven't got all evening, but I do want to hear a little bit about how you then built that into a game. You know, did you start with the story? Did you start with the game concept? Tell us a little bit about your process.
Yeah, so I used to be a journalist. I've been a journalist for 10 years before making games. And the reason I quit journalism is because I wanted to create a studio that would make what I call reality-inspired games. So that was my main objective, really, like, because I think the real world is full of very interesting stories and heroes, basically. And I really wanted to put the light on them. But I really didn't know where to start. And of course, the so-called migrant crisis that happened in Europe at that time. I say so-called because I think that calling that a crisis is really like shying away from one's responsibility when you're a European citizen. But anyway, I really wanted to talk about this topic because it was really important and all over the news, but I didn't know how to. And it's exactly like what Elin said. I didn't really know how to find the right distance to respect players and to give them an experience that would be actually really interesting and that would make them learn and care in a way. And then I bumped into an article on French newspaper Le Monde, which was called The Journey of a Syrian Migrant as told by a WhatsApp conversation. And in this article, this young woman named Dana was discussing with a family over WhatsApp as she was making the journey between Damascus and Germany. She was trying to reach Germany and she sent them messages. And it was really powerful because she used WhatsApp exactly the way that I use WhatsApp. She was like cracking jokes with her family and asking for football results and stuff like that. Did Arsenal win or anything? So exactly like I do. But then 3 messages later, the questions that were asked were questions of life and death. So it was really like mind-blowing to see both how close we were and how completely separated we were. So I contacted the journalist, Lucie Soulier, and I told her I would like to make an adaptation of this story into a game. And she almost hung up on me because she thought, no, there's no way you can make a game about that. And then she said, okay, I agree to talk about this idea with Dana. And Dana, she immediately said, yes, it's a great story. I want my story to be heard and told, and our stories to be told. So I will do everything I can to help you. And then they both became advisors for us to write the story as realistically as possible. Of course, we didn't only tell Dana's story. So if you make the right choices in the game, you can have exactly the same journey as Dana has, but there's also a lot of other possibilities that comes from other testimonies by other refugees. But she was the one who was really there to help us be sure that the voices that we were heard in the game were close to the real voices. So it was really important for us. That's the genesis of the game, basically.
That's such a wonderful story. That's so lovely. What a touching origin story for your game. All right. I mean, I feel like I started with such a big one now, but Imre, tell me a little bit about yours, because obviously, it's an adaptation of an incredibly famous story that has lots and lots of different ramifications. So talk to us about why you decided to tackle such a huge title.
I grew up in Hungary at the very end of the communist regime. I was the last generation who still clapped for the big leader. And I lived through the regime change and the mess which followed. And my family before the regime change was politically active on the wrong side of politics, well, wrong as in considered by the state. And so my family was affected directly. I had an uncle disappear, never to be seen again. And even though my life, it was what we considered to be a soft regime, it still affected us. So Animal Farm was a book which was personally extremely important to me. And I often say this, that there were 3 books which were heavy rotation read to me, and then I read, was Winnie the Pooh, The Little Prince, and Animal Farm. And so I know it's weird, but for me, those 3 books are extremely important, and they teach a lot, all 3 of them, about life. And so I wanted to make an Animal Farm game for decades. In fact, I found notes from 30 years ago about how this game would play. And a few years ago, I remember that I had this moment where I felt that we are ready. We are ready to do this. I think that we as creators are ready. Our form of art is ready. Our audience is ready. Remember, in the last decade, especially with the indie revolution, we've seen more and more games trying to touch on tougher subjects. So I felt like this is the time to do this, and I felt that there was a personal responsibility, that I felt that this has to be talked about. And I think the trigger was a few years back. I was sitting at a lobby somewhere, waiting for a meeting, and I could hear in the background the TV going. And I remember thinking, I heard this, I don't even know what they said, but I heard the rhythm, like da 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 da. And I thought, is this a documentary about communism? And I look up at the screen because all the rhythm sounded like it, and I realized, no, this is an American politician. And they were talking about immigration and terrorists and all the awful things are about to happen, and they are the only solution. And I said, I've heard that speech. I've heard that speech. Just replace terrorists with capitalist spies, and replace immigrants with saboteurs, and it's the same speech, the same tone of voice, the same whatever. And that was extremely scary, because I was like, this is Brezhnevian, Khrushchevian Russia. It's not quite Stalin yet, but I was like, it's heading that way. And so I started reaching out to people, and everyone felt the same way, that they want to get involved, and they felt that it's a very exciting creative project selfishly, but also we felt that there is a responsibility to put it out there. And of course, it was a huge challenge, because adapting such an important work, that, we knew that there is no way we're going to get it right. Like someone is going to hate it, whatever we do. So we had this very difficult challenge, and we worked together with the Orwell estate and the Orwell Foundation to make sure that we get the tone as perfect as possible, because we had to expand on the original work to make it interactive. So it was quite a big challenge.
I can't believe you waited 30 years. That is absolutely fascinating to know that you have always wanted to make this into a game, when I think it's an idea that would have, only just occurred to some people, as has been discussed this evening, that we're only just starting to realize the full potential. So yeah, absolutely incredible. And then tell us about your journey, because obviously, again, another really important story that needed to be told, really sensitively, really carefully.
For me, it was also a personal starting point. In 2014, I heard a friend talking about the court cases, how the children born of German soldiers in Norway had taken the Norwegian state to the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg around 2005 in order to try to get their dignity back. And I was so shocked that I hadn't heard about this. How could I, as a regular Norwegian, not know that what were children were actually trying to get their case heard in Strasbourg? And I noticed how it's sort of in the back of my head, the thought was that, well, they were the German brats. Why should they complain? And sort of realizing as an adult that in my culture, there is this programming that these children are worth less. And it was such a huge, almost physical shock to notice how I had this programming, how this propaganda, or these, I know why it happened, because an occupied people hates its enemy. So I understand the mechanics of it, but I was shocked that this was so, and also that it isn't really taught in Norwegian schools. So I thought it was really important to get these stories out. And these children are some of them are still with us. So that was the starting point. It was to somehow get this story out. But as we worked on the project, it became more and more clear to us that we needed to give the player a positive role, give the player the opportunity to be a force of good and try to change that situation. So it's not just telling a sort of documentary story, but creating a scene where you can try to be a force of good and try to change things. So I think that's a very important aspect of these games, is again to think about the situation for the player and how you should motivate them for change. Because change is basically what I want, I guess, what most of us want to achieve. So that was something that sort of came gradually as we worked on the project. But yeah, personal starting point.
Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of, you touched on it earlier, but the game accomplished so much, because for me, again, this was, in stark contrast to, Animal Farm, which is something we're all very aware of and is difficult because of that. This was difficult because it was a story, I'd never heard before. It was an issue I'd never encountered, as you were saying, that you kind of discovered it later on. And so the thing I thought was so fascinating was how you delivered a lesson, in terms of actual factual documentary storytelling, and then took you through that journey where you had these experiences where you went through this light and shade, and as you said, tried to be a force. I thought it was, absolutely astonishing. Navid, let's talk about 1979 Revolution, because obviously, again, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but tell us about the process of creating this, because another remarkable title.
Thanks. So I grew up in Iran, and after the revolution, when the war with Iraq broke, my family migrated to Canada. And I bring that up because as I felt like I was back then, even still trying to explain to people that when I was growing up in Iran, that my mom and my grandmother weren't actually covered, and kind of trying to explain how modern it was, because what everybody was kind of judging the country and people from Iran was based on the U.S. hostage crisis. As I landed in Canada, the winter of in January of 1980. So that kind of stayed with me. And then I was, obviously, as I mentioned, I started and worked at Rockstar and was the cinematic director there for multiple years. And when I left there, I went back to Iran. And when I was in Iran, I'm the only Iranian credited on the GTA games. So I'm in this small village up around the border of Uzbekistan. And these kids, they have 2 PCs. They're like, oh, hey, Navid, can we get an autograph? And I felt kind of awkward about that. And I said, no, why don't we just all get together and have some tea? And I'll make it quick. But in that conversation, I spoke to a young woman who was 13 years old. And she just said to me that she was a huge GTA fan. And she's like saying, America must be a great place to live. And I was just kind of like thrown off my back as a, you know, obviously now in 2020, I can say a lot of things, you know, that are kind of negative towards what's taken place in the past 4 years, especially as an Iranian and as a Muslim. But it was more of the fact that she had played this game and she was able to have this freedom and these liberties that she assumed everybody has in America that she doesn't have. And I think for me, that was just like a wow moment, and recognize the power of this. So I came back and I had made a couple of documentary feature films. And with my partner, who's a visual anthropologist, I said, we need to do this. And quite honestly, we looked for other examples of how can I tell people about the Iran that I knew, but still also respect the Iran that it has changed and morphed into, and be able to not necessarily try to tell the stories of what we read in the history books of like kings and leaders, revolutionaries, but actually of the 99.8% of us who are living in these kind of like political upheavals, and how to kind of tell that story, and something that could be relatable to a Western audience who would automatically be dismissive of the content because it is Iran. So how can I kind of tap into those? And so, you know, we went about it actually more as a documentary in terms of our development process. And we interviewed over 30 people, and we brought them in from different backgrounds, whether it was social, economical, religious. And in the process of trying to raise funds, I got a lot of pushback from the Iranian diaspora. Why do you want to bring this up, bury this? You know, we're trying to move on. And which side are you on? Are you doing the Shah side or the Khomeini side? And so all that did was just kind of get me more excited to kind of that I was on the right path. The more people that were kind of putting their hands up, I knew that we were doing something in the right direction. So it was really, it was just something that I needed to do. I had the experience doing other things. I'd done some documentaries, and I just saw an incredible opportunity of taking this young girl's story of her experience, saying, how can we create that for a global audience about this world, about this country? And I think, you know, this idea kind of came about in 2007, but I think by the time I hit like 2013, what happened was that I was in shock of how quickly people were forgetting the news. We were reading news on Facebook today and forgetting what had taken place, you know, a week ago. Just to give you a quick example, like a year ago this month, you know, it's particularly with Iran, like a major general was killed in Iraq by the Americans, and then to follow up, Iran retaliated and shot down one of their own planes. Like all these people passed away. We're not even talking about that. We've so moved on, and the idea that you can create something that can have a bigger imprint than documentaries, films, books, that can become a part of that person's DNA of memories. And then therefore it has a greater impact so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. I think this was all kind of, because I'd experienced it. I continually try to explain to people as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult, what Iran was like, because all they thought was mullahs and women walking around in chadors and burning American flags. And meanwhile, if you actually meet people from bring these people together from the West and Iran, you'll realize they have much more in common than they actually have different from one another. So it was just like, it was the challenge of continually people saying, no, it can't be done. And then it was also wanting to kind of liberate this story so it could be shared, but enjoyed by mass audiences rather than the niche that I knew would kind of be drawn to it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all sharing the stories of your games. As I said, I was desperate to dive into them because they are all, you know, very unique within our industry. Let's move on to Q&A. So we've had a couple of questions come in, and Navid, I'm going to come straight back to you actually, because you've had a question from Tom Field, which is kind of asking about your work at Rockstar. So you don't have to speak specifically to Rockstar, but Tom is asking, how, if you are interested, if you are politically active, if you are interested in telling these kind of stories, is there a way that you can do that as a small cog in a AAA machine, he says?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think if you play any of the GTAs, the commentary that actually comes out of the radios, you know, the potential of exploration, the potential of like these audio bits, which are political, you know, it's almost like done in a sarcastic way about, you know, especially with Vice, if you take a look at that, like the rednecks in Florida, and like, we should be giving guns to everyone, babies, you know, kids and stuff. And the crazy thing is, it's a political statement. The scary part is that we actually hear that rhetoric now. So I think there's incredible smart ways of being able to infuse politics and do it subliminally. You know, in line with what Florent was saying, is like, we have the ability to manipulate. And it's a great power, but we can also be smart about it, because audiences are actually smarter than us. They can understand when they're being manipulated far greater than you can ever imagine. Like, even if you didn't intend to, but if it seems slightly fabricated, they're on it. So I think the idea is like to be subtle in that process, to allow them to engage, but allow them to also disengage if they don't want to. Have it more as a part of the background kind of content that can kind of seep in while that journey is taking place. That's the whole, you know, that was at the core of what we did with 1979, was like, we bring in elements that, for example, in America, nobody talks about politics supposedly at Thanksgiving or at Christmas, because everyone has these different political ideas. So we just said, well, that's a great opportunity to actually have a dinner with your mother and father in 1979, and have like your mother's concern, your father say like, yeah, you know, it's okay, go out there on the streets, and your brothers are part of the military. You can, you know, very, very in a subtextual way, infuse all of this stuff in, while you're sticking to the principles that you want in the game that you're making to entertain and engage. So I think there's many, many ways to be able to do it. And I think it's been done more and more in games. It just doesn't get picked up as much because it's not as cool as the grappling hook that allows you to, you know, jump up 30 feet and do some badass moves. So.
Well, I mean, that actually leads quite nicely into another question. So this is from an anonymous attendee. Imre, I'll throw this one to you to start off with. They're asking simply, is politics in games marketable? Does it sell well? So again, you don't have to give specific figures for your game, but, you know, was it a different experience than, you know, marketing a game that doesn't have such a broadly political theme to it?
So before I answer that, I just have to share something which the Orwell Foundation, the Orwell Prize, asked me to share, which is that, and I think this is a fantastic development. Orwell Prize is an extremely prestigious prize for creative writing and journalism, and they decided that this year with the Orwell Youth Prize, they're going to include games, so you can submit game concepts. They believe that games are an extremely powerful form of art, and it's a great way to encourage young people to think about the life around them, and to just develop critical thinking in general, but just consider society and politics and their place in this world we live in. And I'm extremely proud that it's happening, because I really hope that it's going to encourage what was mentioned earlier, that it's great that it doesn't come as an educational thing. It's not that, oh, we are making an educational game. No, we are making a game. And that is relevant to this question that is it profitable? Look, one of the most successful indie games ever made is Papers, Please. It's extremely political. I consider This War of Mine and Frostpunk to be extremely political. You know, there are many huge successes. So in that sense, don't look at it in a way that it's just a subject matter. You could as well talk about love, or you can talk about nature, or you can as well talk about aliens attacking and the space marine punching them in the face, right? These are just themes and you can talk about, and some of them are just, it's just different topics. And we found that we got a really decent reception. We are very pleased, and we think that there is plenty of opportunities for this game to go very different audiences. And now that we have an entertaining, great, successful game, now we're looking into turning it into an educational supplement. right? And that's going to be a next step that we are hoping to extend on the game and make it ready for effectively classroom use. But because I think that we handled it the right way, that it was an artistic and a commercial project first, I think that was the right way. So you can do it. It can be commercially successful, but like with any other game, the games industry is a tough market, right? So you're always going to have a challenge ahead of you, but I think it is absolutely possible to make great success tackling great subjects, including politics.
Fantastic. Now, as this happens basically, go ahead, jump in.
I just want to jump in just for Bury Me My Love. We've been struggling to just like not lose money basically with the game. It's maybe going to happen at some point, not yet, but someday, hopefully. But I also think it's really important to question yourself about the meaning of what you call success. For instance, I would argue that if you make a game that doesn't make your company go bankrupt, and if you have the impression that you've done something that was interesting to you and to a lot of other people, and that like made people think about the world a little bit differently, and that you just push the medium forward, then it's more than successful. It's like a life goal in a way. So like if the Pixel is still here in 2 years and we didn't like close shop, that's successful enough for me. Like, because the interesting part is we bring something to the table that AAA games typically won't yet.
Brilliant.
Also have a small comment on marketing, because when we did a Kickstarter, we had to change the logo in order to come on the front page because it looked too much as an SS logo. So the platforms are blocking us. We struggled to get on Apple in Germany because we had a swastika. And last week we got a mail from Google, Google Play, that they've taken us down in Russia and France and Austria and Germany because we're dealing with World War II topics. So this is an exhausting struggle. We were taken down once before, then Google Norway helped us get back up again, but now it's down again. So this is something you should think about. It's the power of the platforms, and it's a huge and very real problem. So it is more challenging. It depends on the topics you raise, but these platforms are very touchy and they have all the power.
Thank you. I mean, that's really helpful because I'm sure a lot of people are here watching because this is the kind of work they want to be doing. So genuinely, you know, we can talk lots about the ethics, the morality of it, and, you know, whether we should be telling these stories. But actually, great tips like it's going to get taken down on various platforms are also really helpful, very practical. So what I'm going to do now is, because this always happens, we get questions flooding in like the last 10 minutes. I'm going to try and whiz through so if we can have shorter answers. And what I'll do is try and target the questions. But then, as you did now, feel free to jump in if you also have something that you'd like to add. So Ellen, I'm going to come to you for this question. So Ari Attack, hopefully I said that right, asked, is finding commonalities the key to opening your audience to engaging with diverse experiences and difficult subjects?
I think that all gamers are interested in interesting emotional dilemmas. Ethical dilemmas are interesting dilemmas where you have to do choices. So it depends on the wrapping, that you're not pushing an agenda. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, I forgot the question.
No, that was good. That was great. Anybody else want to jump in on that one before I move on? I'm going to take that as a no. So Florent, I had a question for you. So this is from Brendan Duggan. And he asked, what is your advice for a writer or journalist who isn't trained in making games, but would love to use them as a format for telling real and important stories?
Oh, yeah, that's a very interesting question, because for the first 4 years of the Pixel Hunt, we worked for newsrooms in order to make what we called at the time news games. So very simple, easygoing games that would like use systemic representation as a tool for people to understand complex topics. And this is sometimes challenging because the culture of the newsroom is not one of games at all. Like, as most of you sadly know, games even today are still looked down on a little bit, considered a childish pastime and not something really interesting to work with. But some attempts have been very, very successful and very interesting. So I would say that nowadays, with all the tools that you can find online, you can rapid prototype a game on any topic, even without technical knowledge. So if you know how to write, you can use ink or twine or stuff like that, and you can try it and see if you come up with something interesting. Because if you show the people in the newsroom something interesting, then you might have a better chance at unlocking fundings to do something a little bit bigger.
Brilliant. Again, hugely helpful practical advice. Thank you so much. Navid, this is a question for you again. So Arash Nadiri wanted to know your thoughts on censorship. So because your game is banned in Iran, they were wondering if you had thoughts on the idea of making work that can reach audiences where it's likely to be censored, so that it's reaching kind of, the widest possible audience base.
No. Sure. You should, and this is again my own personal view, you should not censor any of the material. In fact, you should be pushing the edges as much as you can, because you have a responsibility as a storyteller and as an artist to be as honest and to convey what has taken place. That goes back to your research. Of course, that responsibility of making sure that you're getting an equal story that represents everybody that you're trying to tell the story about. But I told a story, I created a game where as a Muslim, you can pray in it and have that translated into English and open up doors. I provided open opportunities for discussion for all the political spectrum in Iran, and the game still got banned. So it doesn't really make a difference what I was going to do. Anything that's not coming, basically sanctioned or approved by the government of Islamic Republic of Iran is going to be considered as propaganda, is going to be considered as, what do they call it? I think I was creating something evil for the souls of the younger generation of Iranians. It was like pretty amazing. I got banned, so I haven't been able to go back to Iran since then. Well, does it burn my ass that I can't take my daughters to a country that I'm trying to celebrate and share with people? Absolutely. But would I change it? Absolutely not. In fact, once we got banned, we turned around. We immediately localized the game in Farsi, and we did our research and found out that Iranians were accessing the Apple App Store through VPNs in Malaysia, and so going to Malaysia and to Turkey. And so we put the games there, and we did it for free, and so that everyone in Iran could get access to it. And we provided as many ways as we could to that particular audience, knowing that they were going to have a tough time. Saying that, in line with Ellen, we paid some consequences with Apple kind of saying they were becoming overly politicized. And we saw from promises of editorials, coverage, and all that marketing love that you need for us to almost kind of get banished and put in the corner, which was, hard to kind of take, especially when you are doing something that you love, but you want to also make some money so you can go on and do another one. So I would say absolutely. You cannot think about the censorship. You need to be 100% true to the story that you're telling. And in fact, don't hold back. If you try to water anything down, you're doing a disservice to yourself, you're doing it to the game, and you're doing it to the audience.
Fantastic. Oh, these are such good answers. This is such an inspiring panel. It's so lovely to listen to. I hope everybody at home is getting as much out of it. Imre, I've got a question for you. So again, this is from an anonymous attendee. And given, how you spoke of, the personal connection that you had with Animal Farm, they'd asked, how do you overcome self-doubt when making projects that are political, but also personal?
I don't know how anyone does it. I couldn't. It was terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying, because in our case, that was a very specific a bar to hit. So it wasn't just about, I want to say an honest story about a really important matter, but it was also, how can I possibly think that I can match Orwell, right? And we very quickly, we said, well, we can't. We just have to do our best, right? And so a lot of research, it was mentioned, Navid mentioned it earlier, just know your shit. Like don't just, get into like this, think, I know this. No, you don't. No, you don't. If you think you know it, you don't. Just investigate, just research, just get all the perspective, try to understand the perspective of people who you disagree with. and then just do your diligence, and then you can stand up and you can say, okay, I did my best. And if we make a mistake, or if someone doesn't like it, you can still look in the mirror and say, I've done my darnest to do it right. It's always going to be, but frankly, if you want to touch on an important subject, it's always going to be hard. My grandfather always said that any job is hard if you do it right. And it's definitely true when you tackle these kind of subjects.
Well, what a wonderful place to end. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, sharing your process, sharing your stories this evening. As I said, I hope everybody watching has enjoyed it as much as I have, because it has been absolutely fascinating. And, you know, as I'm sure you could tell all the way through, I'm a huge fan of all the titles that we've mentioned tonight. So please do go and check them out if you haven't played them yet. They are all just transformative, powerful experiences in completely different ways, and they will stay with you for such a long time. Now, I'm just going to mention again that tonight was in collaboration with the Orwell Foundation, and as Imre mentioned, they are for the first time accepting games as examples of political writing. So please do, if you're working on something, if you've made something that you think fits that, even if you're not sure, go for it. Please do apply, because it will be a wonderful way to celebrate the incredible work that's being done in our industry to interrogate, to explore, to confront these kind of issues. But for now, that's it from us. I hope that you enjoyed this session. There will be a recording up soon if you missed any of it. But for now, just to say a huge thank you to our incredible panelists, and we'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.